Welcome to the weekly discussion of how the technology of today impacts the world of tomorrow. This is the Fill in the Blank podcast, and I'm Ross Strader, joined by my co-host Keith Abels. And you can follow us on Twitter at AskFITB or email us fitbpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to know that you're listening and what you think about the Fill in the Blank podcast. Hey, Keith, this has turned into one of my favorite things of the week. I don't know about you.
Well, this is like our 23rd or 24th episode. You mean it's just now turned into one of your favorite things?
No, not just now, but I just was thinking about it today. I really look forward to the time that we get to talk about how the technology of today impacts the world of tomorrow. And this has turned out to be a really fun deal.
That seems like a passive-aggressive compliment.
No, it's not at all. I think it's great.
It's like I'm hearing in my head you saying, this sucks a lot less than I originally thought it would.
No, that's not what I mean at all. It has exceeded my expectations. That's for sure. And it's not that I thought it was going to suck. It was, hey man, we're two guys. We've been trying to figure this deal out, and we've stumbled through production quality. We've stumbled through formatting. And, in the beginning we thought, gosh, we run out of topics after 4 or 5 shows. And the truth is, here we are, well into the 20s as far as episodes go. There continues to be topics. This continues to be exciting. I have not tired of this conversation at all.
I haven't either. And you know who else hasn't tired?
Who's that?
Listeners around the world. We have new listeners in 4 countries. I am happy to report this week we have new listeners in Australia, Finland, France, and China. We finally entered China. So many companies have such a hard time kind of making it or breaking into the Chinese market.
Yeah.
We've officially broken into the Chinese market. It's not a big audience in China, but they have like 1.5 billion people. So if we can get, a big chunk of the Chinese population interested in what we have to say, hey, there's our audience right there.
I know. Well, I was looking, I saw that on the show notes, and so I'd looked up the China's population. They actually have almost, to the person, 1 billion more people than we have in the United States, and just about the same landmass. Of course, you have to include Alaska in that when you are talking about the United States landmass. But they have 1 billion more people occupying the same amount of space.
I don't know if I'm just more in awe of the fact that they have 1 billion more people, or that the landmass of those 2 countries.
Well, I know it only because my trusty assistant, Google, was able to look that up for me. So it's not knowledge I just carry around in my head. I don't carry, country or continent landmass around in my head. I don't do that.
Well, okay. Well, never mind.
All right.
I'm not as impressed anymore.
Well, hey, welcome, a big fill-in-the-blank welcome to the listeners around the world. We are so glad you're listening. We would love to hear from you. We'd love for you to reach out and let us know that you're listening to this podcast and what you think of it, and what you're interested in your part of the world and where you sit. How does this show interest you? And we would love to include you in the conversations that we're having here. All right, so Keith, we've got some follow-up from last week. Last week we dedicated the show to the Google I/O and their I/O conference and the several things that they rolled out, all of those things being related to artificial intelligence in some way. We went through that list, and a couple of things happened this week that we want to follow up on, and one of those is Google Duplex. This is the one we spent probably the most time talking about. It's the one we dropped a clip of the AI voice that carries on a conversation and negotiates dinner reservations at a restaurant. And so, but that has continued to be a topic of conversation in the news, and something popped this week.
Well, yeah, so Google has, this was our big topic last week. I think it was the big topic of all the tech shows, Google Duplex, and it certainly continued the conversation over the last week to 2 weeks or so about some of the issues that have kind of come up because of Google announcing their Google Duplex service or product, whatever you want to call it. So number one, as we talked about last week, Google made no mention about ethics or how they plan on rolling this out or any controls that would be in place.
No, we talked about that.
Right. And that's a big deal,
Yeah.
right? And so we talked about it. Everybody has talked about that they just completely left that out of their keynote address, which seems like a big miss, especially with the scrutiny on tech companies right now. But there's a more practical issue that's going on with Google Duplex, and that's the fact that Google said we will record these calls so that the user, can listen to them later or can refer back to them. So what I mean by that is they say Google Duplex is going to this voice assistant that will call and make reservations for you, right? Mm-hmm. So that's what Google Duplex is. If you missed last week's show, you as the user. So let's say I had my Google Assistant call and make a reservation at a restaurant for me. I can go back and listen to that later. Right, so that's what they mean by it will be recorded so the user can hear it later.
Yeah, that's right.
Now,
kind of a quality control.
Exactly,
yeah.
Right? And so you can do that actually with your Google voice searches now. I don't know if you knew this, but all of those are recorded, and you can go back and listen to yourself making these Google voice requests. Those are already recorded for you, and you can go back and reference those.
I did not know that.
Yep. So this is kind of a continuation of that policy that Google already has. Well, the issue with that is that in certain states in the U.S., and this I'm sure is probably an issue around the world, it's not legal to actually record a conversation, a phone conversation, unless both parties are aware that it's being recorded from the very beginning. So you can't start a conversation. And one state where this is actually already a law? The state of California. And during Google's keynote, they released a recording of them calling a restaurant in San Francisco, which is in California. And at no point in that conversation did it mention that it was being recorded. Now, they could have edited that. They could have had an arrangement ahead of time, but it kind of takes some of the fun out of their demo when you realize, well, okay, was this illegal that they did this without disclosing the call was being recorded? Okay, that's one issue, which to me is like, okay, well, it's not that big of a deal. They didn't tell the person. But in California, it is a big deal because, California. But the other issue is that if they did arrange with this restaurant, like, hey, we're going to call you and record this conversation, like, well, aren't you letting them know what's about to happen? And then that kind of takes some of the magic, air quotes, magic out of the demo that they did on stage, right?
It does.
So anyway, Google had all kinds of fallout to deal with this week. And you know what? They deserve every bit of it because they did not include at least 30 seconds in the keynote about, of course, we're going to, be responsible with how we roll this out. We are considering all the implications that can come along with releasing a technology like this. We know there are ethical concerns. They didn't do any of it. And they deserve everything they get this week for not even taking the time to explain any of that as they were rolling this out. So anyway, they've caught all kinds of flack this week about the ethical implications of releasing this thing. And why are we celebrating the fact that we can fool other people into thinking a robot is real? Is that really something we should celebrate? So it sparked a really interesting conversation around the ethics in technology, which I think is a great conversation to have.
Yeah.
And, there's we don't know that this will actually be a product that Google releases. Google is really known for announcing a bunch of stuff and then either launching it or not launching it or launching it as something else or launching 3 versions of it. They're kind of all over the place sometimes with some of their launches. So I have a feeling they're going to reel this one back in for a while and then either release it much later when they can get maybe ahead of the curve here on how they actually plan on rolling it out. They've got to do some PR work, or they're either just not going to release it at all, and this was more of a kind of more of a PR stunt than anything. I don't know.
Surely that crossed somebody in the Google law department's mind. Surely.
You would think so, but they didn't mention anything.
No, they didn't. And the one article I read is, and they brought it up, and we talked about it last week, and I think several people ended up talking about it, how easy it becomes for something like that to abuse small businesses. And so that small businesses end up being they're going to end up being harassed. And I think the average individual at home, we talked about the application to telemarketing. I think it increases the ability that people get harassed, particularly if, those phone calls are recorded. And you live in a state that's not a law. And, all that gets recorded. And I think it probably ought to be a law everywhere that a conversation is not recorded without your knowledge.
Well, you know who thinks that this is a good idea as far as making computers sound more lifelike? Besides Google, I mean?
Well, who's that?
Microsoft. Microsoft acquired an AI company to make Cortana and bots sound more human. This comes from an article at The Verge. So Microsoft is acquiring a conversational AI startup. Semantic Machines is the name of it. I don't know that I'm a fan of that name. Semantic Machines. In an effort to make bots and intelligent assistants like Cortana sound and respond more like humans.
No, that's a bunch of computer engineers came up with that name. That sounds really cool.
So are they machines or not, or is it just semantics? I'm confused by the name. Anyway,
yeah, well, I think they were going for the play on the if they just shortened it to the initials. You know what I'm saying? That could be their Inc., S&M Inc. or something like that. But
I don't know that S&M works any better in their favor. But it says Microsoft's acquisition will boost the company's Cortana digital assistant, as well as the company's Azure bot service. Azure is their kind of cloud service platform used by 300,000 developers. So we'll see what they actually do with this. But the fact that it sounds more lifelike, I guess, isn't that big of a deal, because even over time, Siri, which I think we agree is the worst of the voice assistants,
right,
has started to sound a little more lifelike. So if it sounds better and less machine-like, that's fine. If it's, telling me things like what's on your calendar next, or read this text message to me, those sorts of things. But if it's being used in a way that's designed to fool other people, I think that's where this kind of starts going off the rails, and there are other things that need to be considered. So I don't know how Microsoft plans on using this, but clearly this is a trend that's not going to go away.
Well, I think you're right. I think the issue is the bullseye they're trying to hit is they want to increase usage. They want you to use it more. And so, one of the ways, one of the possible solutions to you using it more is if it sounds more lifelike, more human, more conversational, able to negotiate back and forth. The idea is that you'll use it more, and what it appears they haven't anticipated, or maybe they have anticipated, is the pushback, the ethical pushback, the concerns about how this will be abused. That's certainly more on the forefront of people's minds than it was even a year ago. If this was introduced a year ago, maybe we wouldn't have been having these conversations. But people are very gun-shy about this new technology that comes out and how it potentially will be abused.
Well, but you know what? I think that's a good thing. I really do.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's a good thing.
It's a good thing.
Well, so Google News, the world's had a week or so now to process all of that. And 60 Minutes actually ended up running a story. Certainly they didn't do the story. They had been working on the story for a while. It just so happened it coincided. They're releasing it after the Google I/O conference. But you said it's 13 minutes on 60 Minutes about the real power of Google. That's the title of it, right?
Yeah, it's interesting that this came out this week. I mean, like you said, these stories are in development for a while. But so 60 Minutes ran a story this week about the real power of Google, and they really approached this story from the standpoint of antitrust. And so they talked to a pretty well-known antitrust lawyer. They talked to a government official, and I can't remember what European agency she was a part of or who she represented exactly, but she was explaining the things, the violations that they see Google committing on a pretty regular basis, of how they're pushing some of their competitors' search results further down in actual searches, and favoring Google's own products or services in search results, which is something that a lot of people have complained about. And then they also interviewed the folks over at Yelp, who kind of have the same complaint about Google kind of dominating page 1 of search, and anything on page 2, you might as well not even be in business, is what they're saying. So the story kind of is coming from the angle of Google abusing their power as the market leader. They own 90% of the search market. Okay. Right. So so if you consider all the search engines, and if you ask people to name more than one search engine, how many people could? Some people would maybe say Bing, like, okay, well, that's true. But I think Bing is like 3% of the market. Bing is from Microsoft. That's Microsoft's search engine.
Yeah.
Which is a terrible name, by the way. That's another story for another day. Google has 90% market share, just in general, on search. Their next closest competitor, which is Microsoft with Bing as a search engine, has like 3%. So the question is that a monopoly? Yeah.
I guess. Yeah, it is.
Right.
And
I mean,
where,
it is.
where it's
the
fuzzy
question,
is
though,
there's
is
no money.
it's not illegal to be a monopoly. It's not. It's illegal to abuse that monopoly power in different ways. One way is to enter a new market. Another way is to just abuse that market power to eliminate competition. So it's not necessarily by default illegal to have 90% market share. It's not.
Right.
It is illegal to abuse that power in various ways. And then, of course, different governments can decide, on what they consider abuse or not. But I mean, once you have that much power, it's, this is, very much like Microsoft in the 90s with Internet Explorer.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, they owned the browser market by kind of the same margin. It was 90% plus Microsoft, and they got broken up. And that was the last really big antitrust issue we saw, at least in the United States.
It is. Well, in Google, they did an end around, so that came up, your web browser was preloaded to search with Google, and now you have several options to set your browser what to search, whether it's Bing or whether it's Google. Now it comes default Google, most of our browsers, but they had to add that in, particularly, I noticed when it came out on Safari, where, you have a drop down now and you can pick the search engine that you want. Google doesn't have a monopoly as, being the only default that's available.
Well, but I mean, who's going to change that?
Nobody, because all the others is
Ask
and
the
Ask
rest of them
Jeeves
is they
still
suck.
around?
Ask Jeeves.
Remember Ask Jeeves?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
That
was short-lived.
Nope. Well, and the other thing, I mean, do you remember that Microsoft had the ad campaign, just Bing it and decide or whatever? Come on. Anyway, hey, you mentioned earlier Google News. We've been using Google News for a week.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We talked about it. That was
this was your pick last week.
Yep.
So what's your opinion after 1 week?
I love it. I've been using it every day. I like how it's formatted. It's easy to get around. And like I said last week, it aggregates local news for me. And I really like that. I like being able to click in and seeing what the local news is. And it's the only one that does it. Flipboard doesn't do it. Apple News does not aggregate local news for me. At least I haven't. I don't know how to set that up if it has the capability of doing it. But the Google News made that super easy. It knows my zip code, and so it automatically adds that into that sort of timeline that it feeds me every day. And then it updates. It'll update itself all the time. So it'll update itself throughout the day. So I can look at it in the morning and look at it in the afternoon, and it's different news. I like it.
Yeah. So the content for me is good, and I agree with you. I do like the fact that we have a local option there. It kind of makes me think that, I mean, that's a no-brainer. Like, why isn't that built into everything else? And so I actually earlier today went back to my Apple News app and tried to add some local news sources to it.
Yes.
And so on Apple News, what they call it is a channel. So if your local, let's just say your local newspaper has an Apple News channel, then you can add it.
Okay.
If they don't, then you're not going to get that. Now, so that, to me, it looks like you have to, your local, let's just say newspaper, your local newspaper would have to create an Apple News channel in order for you then to go add it to your sources.
Yeah.
But Google knows where I live.
Right.
And just added it without me having to do that.
Right.
So that's the power of, for good or for bad, whatever your opinion is on, how Google does what Google does. They know where I live, and so they automatically gave me news that was local to that location without me having to tell it that.
Mm-hmm.
So that, I don't know if that's a privacy thing, where Apple kind of is a little more strict on their privacy rules, and Google obviously is not, because in this case, they said, well, we want to give you relevant information, so we need to know your location, which I had to give it permission to do in the first place. And when I gave it permission, it gave me local news.
Yeah.
So my opinion on Google News is this. The content is fine. I have no issues with the content. I like their methodology as far as having one tab that it kind of uses their little Google secret sauce to tell me, here's what we think you may like. Another tab that shows me what everybody sees, so we're all seeing the same news. and then the options then to go add additional sources. I like their methodology there. Some of the opportunities that they have, in my opinion, would be to, number one, that just the graphical interface is not nearly as pretty or clean or as aesthetically pleasing as Apple News or even Flipboard or something like that.
Yeah.
Like most Google products, it looks like an engineer did this and they didn't really take time to have a designer go back and say, let me clean this up for you.
Right, yes.
Right.
Different size fonts, all those things
Yeah,
that make
so
it
they
a
kind
lot.
of need to do that. It's not as pretty. Another thing that's one of those design things or kind of user interface things is that, so if I'm looking at an article on Apple News or even a source on Apple News, and so I'm using that just because that's my other kind of primary news app that I use on my phone.
Right.
And so if I click on an article, there's a static menu bar at the bottom of the screen on every article, regardless of the source, that has a share option and then either a like or a dislike option, like the heart or the heart with the line through it.
Yeah, that's very easy to get to.
Right. On Google News, you actually have to, there's a little little button. There's like 3 little dots on every article. And then I have to click that, and it gives me like a little drop-down thing that then I can share it or save it or like it or not like it. It takes it's an extra little step in there. And that may seem like that's trivial, but it's not.
Well,
to me, it tells me that just the user interface has been either prioritized. The design is just better in Apple News. Now, to be fair, this is Google's first stab at this Google News app in its current form. So over time, they'll probably fix that. So the content, good. The design needs some work.
Well, the other thing I noticed is I tried to send, and I did send. I shared an article from Google News on the app on my iPhone. Click the 3 dots, click share, and then and that's not super intuitive. So once you get in there, it makes it easy for you to send an email to somebody that has a Gmail address. To send a text, to text that article to somebody, it takes you a second to figure out how to do that. But then once you do that, they receive the text with the article, and they get a generic thing from Google that says, hey, Ross Strader has sent you this news article. Type yes into your text to accept it. And so you...
Whoa. Really?
Yes.
Why do you have to text yes to accept it?
I don't know.
Send me an article.
All right, hang on one second. I'll do it real quick. Yeah, let me do it real quick.
Let's test this.
Okay, so I'm pulling up the Google News right now, and I'll just click on this first article related to, well, I'm not going to do that article.
I'm looking at the article you're probably looking at, and thank you for not sending it.
Yes, so here we go. Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, since that's important, and I know that you would not want to miss out on that news. So I'm going to send it to you in a message.
Did you just say that was important?
Yeah, I know, because I know you follow the royals. I know you're devoted to following the royals. So, all right, so I just sent it to you in a text message.
Okay, I got it. So let's see here. So Prince Harry, Meghan Markle spotted for first time after a royal wedding from E-Online. So I'm going to click on that. It just took me straight to the article.
It just took you straight to the article, huh?
Yeah. It didn't ask me.
Maybe it has something to do with how my wife's phone is set up.
It would not be at all surprising if, depending on who you send it to, there are different responses because Google.
Let me see here. Let me try this again.
I wonder if it's because I have the app installed on my phone. Did she have the app installed on her phone?
She does not have the app installed.
That may be the difference.
On her phone. Let me try it this way and see what happens. Okay, I just sent it to you again, and see how it comes up now.
Oh, okay. This says, Ross Strader wants to connect with you on Google News. Reply yes to receive the link to connect.
Oh, okay. Well, so that's what I did then. So I told you it was a little bit hard for me to figure out at first how to exactly send the text, and they've actually added the messenger icon down there now. But when I did it earlier this week, the messenger icon wasn't on there. So I typed in her number in the share box, and then what it does is I guess then it sends it through the app. So, and that's how I just did it with you, was I typed your number in, so the news app actually sends you the message, and then you reply yes, and then you get the link.
All right, I'm going to type in yes.
Okay.
Let's see what happens. Okay, so then I get a link to it.
But, I guess you could do that if you say you didn't want to share your number with somebody, but you wanted to send them an article. That doesn't make any sense to me, but, I guess that is a possibility.
Weird. Okay. Well, version 1's not bad. We'll see what they do with it.
Yeah. All right. All right. Well, so that's that. Google News, certainly their I/O Developers Conference with AI that undergirds each of those things that we talked about last week has been in the news. We'll put a link in the show notes if you want to check out the 60-minute story, The Real Power of Google. I think it's very interesting. And we'd love to know what you think about the Google News app or Google Duplex or anything else that Google's developing right now.
Thanks for listening to the Fill in the Blank podcast. To support our show, go to patreon.com/FITB. Patreon allows you to support our show on your terms. You can contribute any amount that you want, so you get to decide how much our show is worth to you. A challenge for our listeners is to support us by contributing just $1 per month. That's only 3 cents per day. Your support helps us grow our audience and upgrade our audio equipment. Thanks for listening to the show and supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/FITB. patreon.com/FITB.
Okay, Keith, so we want to get into the topic today, and we spent a lot of time in the follow-up, and so we may just have to run through the topic quickly and then do some more follow-up on the topic over the next couple of weeks. But it is related to Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference that's going to, I guess, happen on June the 4th. And this becomes one of those rumor shows, speculation shows. What exactly is Apple going to talk about? What are they going to reveal? Is it going to be new hardware, new software? What's in the pipeline for Apple? And it may be that, I think there's a lot of people that have an expectation. They have a lot to respond to with all the things that Google has come out with and even Microsoft has come out with over the last couple of weeks. But we are looking at a CNET article that seems to have the best sort of rundown of all the rumors of June the 4th that are related to, so there are iOS 12 rumors, there's new iPad Pro rumors, new MacBooks, and things like that. And so let's just walk through this list. Tim Cook's going to take the stage in San Jose on June the 4th, and these are the things that people have expectations about.
Yeah, so, WWDC is, supposed to be all about software and developers and, things like that, but Apple does use the stage from time to time to talk about hardware, and usually not the flagship stuff, but, they as much as there for a while they were kind of very predictable and sticking to the same kind of product launch cycle, they've gone against that so often now that we're just like constantly just second guessing things. So the best part about having a rumor show is you can just make stuff up and it's just a rumor show. So you're not wrong, right?
Yeah, totally.
So
that's right.
So what you probably won't see are, new high-end iPhones. So whatever the sequel to the iPhone 10 is, or the next iPhone, whatever comes after iPhone 8 or 8 Plus, you probably won't see those. Apple's mentioned the new Mac Pro. It's not coming out till 2019, so you're not going to see the new Mac Pro. The HomePod just came out, so you're not going to see that. We just saw a new iPad, kind of the entry-level iPad launch, so you won't see that. So the question becomes, well, if you're not going to see any of that stuff, what are you going to see?
Right.
So here, according to CNET anyway, are 4 product categories that have a good shot of being refreshed in June. So the first would be MacBooks and iMacs. So it makes sense that, these are kind of the bread and butter of the hardware line as far as Macs go, right? So kind of MacBooks and iMacs.
That's right.
Are, just what you see most people with. And I said that I was kind of laughing, like you don't see people carrying around their iMacs. However, there is an accessory that allows you to carry your iMac around with you. Maybe I'll put a link in the show note, because if you see somebody carrying one, it's just
like an
ridiculous.
iMac bag?
Yes, it's like an iMac little satchel thing you put over your shoulder and carry your giant iMac around. It's dumb. All right, so anyway, let's talk about MacBooks. I'm more interested in the MacBook discussion than I am the iMac discussion.
Okay.
Because the MacBook over the last year or two has become maybe the most controversial product Apple makes for a couple of reasons.
All right.
Number one, the touch bar. There have been all kinds of opinions about the touch bar. Do we need it? Do we not need it? Is it dumb? Is it gimmicky? Is it not? Whatever. But what's become more of an issue for them on these MacBooks, on these MacBook Pros, is the damn keyboard.
Oh, yes.
The keyboard has caught so much flack, and it sounds like it's probably for good reason that the failure rate on these things has caused such an uproar with the Mac community, especially kind of the Mac loyalist press, that people are actively buying older models or different models. And Ross, I have a confession to make. This actually impacted the decision that I made on the last computer that I bought. And so the question is, has Apple learned enough over the last year or two with these butterfly keyboards? The butterfly, when I say butterfly, the little switch or the little mechanics underneath the key, Apple refers to that as a butterfly switch instead of the traditional switch that's underneath a key on a keyboard. And so they've prioritized design. And so Apple has really prioritized the thinness of their machines. And in order to make a laptop even thinner, you have to address the keyboard, right? And so that means the keys on your keyboard can't have as much travel. And that means when you push the key, it goes down less than a traditional keyboard would. And they call that key travel. So when you press it, it doesn't move very much. It's really kind of stiff, and it's got a very short throw to it. And so for a lot of people, they don't like that. Just the feel and the feedback that they get is not really what they're used to, and so they don't like it. So one issue is I just don't like how it feels. But the bigger issue is just the reliability of them. Because it has such short travel, then if anything gets underneath that, and we've seen in a lot of articles just even specks of dust or very small particles get in there, you can't clean it out. You can't pop the key off like you can on some keyboards, spray some air in there and then pop your key back on and off you go.
Right.
And the other problem is, and we've seen this with iPads and iPhones and even iMacs, is that you can't just easily replace the keyboard. So if you have a MacBook Pro, for example, and you have one key that's bad, you have to replace the entire keyboard and the entire top assembly of that MacBook Pro, which is about a $700 repair.
Yeah.
And to me, that's just dumb. So Apple's cut a lot of flack over this keyboard design and the reliability or lack thereof with it. And so the question becomes, if we do see new MacBooks this year, do they fix the keyboard? Do they have some new updated butterfly mechanism, or do they revert back to something? I find it hard to believe they would revert back to something, because that would almost be like admitting they were wrong, and that's not something they do. So what do they do to this keyboard? So do you have a machine that has this keyboard on it, Ross?
I do. I have the butterfly keyboard. I personally haven't had any issues with the functionality of it, but I certainly understand the travel on the keyboard. And so if I'm able to sit at my desk, I use Apple's Magic Keyboard, Smart Keyboard on the desk, and plug it into another monitor. I do not use that if I'm sitting and spending a lot of time writing. And it's not that I don't. It's not that I have had a great deal of difficulty with it. I use it. I've adjusted to it, but it certainly is different. And now I will say this: I like that the keyboard. That the laptop's thinner. So however they address it, it won't be that they're going to add more bulk to the Mac. I don't think they're going to do that. But when this came out, they were very proud of this butterfly keyboard technology. But in the real world use, it has not stood up to, the old keyboards. And this isn't the first time keyboards has come up for Mac. You go back several generations, that seems to be the keyboard everybody really liked. The keys stood out. There was a lot of travel on it. Made it very easy, particularly if you're somebody who types a lot of words a minute. It was very functional. This, it almost is disappearing into the top here as you sit there with the mouse. The other thing is the mouse is very big on it, and so your hand or your thumb as you're typing will get in the way, and it will bounce your cursor around just because there's so much keyboard here. I mean, so much mouse on the keyboard that
So you're talking about the big touchpad.
I'm talking about
at
the
bottom
touchpad.
of-
Yeah, the trackpad
okay.
on the bottom, the
Yeah.
touchpad on the bottom is so big that your hands, your thumbs, all of that get in the way, and you'll end up bouncing your cursor around. And that is kind of maddening. That drives me absolutely crazy.
So I bought a new machine 7 or 8 months ago, and it was replacing, I think, a 2012 MacBook Pro.
Right.
And so my 2012, maybe it was a 2013, whatever it was, it was just super sluggish, super slow. I couldn't really do anything to update it, so it was time to buy a new computer. And I was not excited about buying a new computer. And that's depressing.
It is
I should
depressing.
be excited about buying a new computer.
I know.
I went to the Apple Store a couple of times. I went to Best Buy a couple of times, and I played on the. At that point, I guess I don't know if it was the second generation butterfly keyboard. Maybe it was, and I had heard so much about it that it had definitely had an impact on my buying decision. And so the two things is, so I started typing on it, and one thing I noticed, the key travel certainly is pretty shallow, right? There's not much key travel at all. And so the more I kind of tried, I thought, well, I could probably get used to this. But like you, most of the time, my laptop's actually just kind of in a docked state with the lid closed and plugged into a large monitor. And I use my Apple Magic Keyboard just like you do. So I thought, well, okay, that's not that big of a deal. But the issues with reliability and the repairs and all that, that's what got me. I thought, well, I could learn to, be okay with this keyboard as often as I would actually use the keyboard that's on the machine, because I will use this other keyboard most of the time, so that's fine. But then the reliability got to me, and that keyboard, Ross, was freaking loud. Is your keyboard loud?
It is loud. It
when
is,
you
and
type
it's not,
on it?
It is, and it's not the pleasant loud. So sometimes you have
No,
the
it's
clicking,
annoying loud.
the clicking that's almost metronome, and you like that, and you get a rhythm.
It's not the reassuring older, like old school programmer keyboard.
No, it's not.
It is, it is annoying, like somebody smacking their gum.
It
loud.
is. It's like somebody tap. As you're sitting with somebody and they're wrapping their fingers, on the desk. That's what it feels like. And so it is not my favorite keyboard. In fact, I'll tell you my favorite keyboard is I go back to, I either have a 2011 or a 2010 MacBook Pro, and it's the one where you still had the screws on the bottom of it. You could take it out.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually replaced the hard drive. I put an SSD drive in it, and just replacing the hard drive with an SSD drive increased the speed of that computer, and it actually works great. We still have it. It's a family computer. I have a lot of programs used on it, and so if I leave my laptop out in my office, in the living room, I'll use that, and I love that. I love the keyboard on it. There's everything about it I love. Now, it's heavy, it's bulky, but it still has a CD drive in it. There are a lot of things I really like about that, MacBook Pro, and I will grieve the day that thing finally goes kaput. But that's one of my favorite models of the MacBook Pro.
I agree. So, okay, let me ask you about this. Does your MacBook Pro have the touch bar?
My MacBook Pro does have the touch bar.
Okay, and what are your thoughts on the touch bar?
Well, there are things I like about the touch bar. Now, the things I use the most, are volume, stop play, start play, those sorts of things. They're much easier with a traditional keyboard. You can just, put your finger up there, turn the volume up, turn the volume down. Here, the way that I have it set up, because I have my touch bar set to auto respond to the program that I'm in, which means every program has different touch bar, a different touch bar menu. So there are things I like about that, but if you want to adjust the volume with your touch bar settings like that, you can't just, turn the volume off, turn the volume on. You've got to actually press the volume button, then the touch bar changes, and then it gives you a volume menu. So it's a two-step process to adjust your volume. It's a two-step process to adjust your, your screen, how bright your screen is, the brightness on your screen, and things like that. And so I do not like that nearly as well as the old, F hotkeys that you can, you just touch that and you're adjusting your brightness, you're adjusting your volume. You can turn your music on, you can turn your music off, that sort of thing. The touch bar, I think, is a fine idea. I think it's a misapplication. It's Apple wanting to respond to a touch screen without putting a touch screen in. That's simply what it is.
All right, so I'm kind of hearing that you could live without the touch bar.
I could live without the touch bar. I do not use it, so I have it set up to respond to my different applications, and rarely do I use it in my applications. I utilize keyboard shortcuts far more often than I'm going to reach up and use the touch bar.
All right, so that's MacBooks. We'll see what they do, but you've got two big controversial issues there. Number one, the keyboard. Number two, the touch bar. So if they do introduce new MacBook laptops, MacBook Pros, well, at some point they will, whether it's at WWDC this year or maybe it's in September or maybe it's next year. At some point they will. And so, that's going to be a big point of contention with buyers based on just the issues that we see with the current generation devices.
I agree.
However, we are about due for new iPad Pros. This is more our speed.
Yes.
Right? So we are super iPad Pro fans. As a matter of fact, in the last couple of months, we've talked about the iPad Pro quite a few times, and I'm proud of us. We haven't talked about iPads in like a month or two.
Yeah, it's been several episodes.
It's been a long time, so we're due a good conversation. And wouldn't you know it, it's one where we're kind of short on time. But so it is possible we could see new iPad Pros announced at this event, WWDC, on June 4th.
Right.
The question is, what would we actually see in a new iPad Pro, considering that Apple just announced at their education event a couple of months ago the entry-level iPad that now supports the Apple Pencil?
Mm-hmm.
So what would a new iPad Pro actually give us? Because the iPad Pro is pretty awesome as is.
Well, it is awesome, and the thing that distinguished the Pro, or at least in most people's minds, what distinguished the Pro was the use of the Apple Pencil. So you had to buy a Pro to be able to use the Pencil. And so, and I think even the new iPads, the education iPads that have come out, I think they have the A10 chip in them, which is plenty fast. Those things are lightning fast, and A11's faster. Certainly, there's probably A12. But I think the thing you'd have to see in the new Pros is they distinguish the Pro line more from your base line and make it something that, as consumers go to make the choice, there would be a reason they would choose the Pro. And, as we talked about it before, it's likely to incorporate some of the things we've seen in the iPhone 10. So you'll probably get, screen to screen. It'll probably be more screen. It will probably eliminate the home button. You'll have better camera. You'll be able to do your animojis on there. So they may upgrade that. And, and it's like you said, when you went to Disney World, you saw people taking their iPads and taking pictures with it. So it could be the iPad Pro becomes a real, photography device, very much like your newer, your iPhone, your 8 Plus or your iPhone 10. So they could incorporate that, and that would give it an advantage from that point. But other than that, I don't know what else that they could do.
The new iPad Pro, and I am a big iPad Pro fan. I've had more people ask me about the large iPad Pro since I've been talking about it on our show. And I've had a handful of people just in the last couple of months ask me, what I thought about the larger iPad Pro, why I like it, and then ended up buying one. And I didn't get my royalty check from Apple. It's probably lost in the mail somewhere, but
I'm sure.
But this is one of those questions where I think, the iPad Pro models are so good already that it's hard for me to imagine what they could do to make me want to buy one.
I agree. And it is not, I don't think the distinction is going to be in software. I don't think it's going to be you're going to have, an iOS 12 that comes out, an iOS 12 Lite and an iOS 12 Pro. I don't see Apple moving in any distinction in their operating systems. And so it has only to do with the hardware. So I do think they have a challenge before them if they're going to continue to distinguish a high-end iPad, and I'd be curious to see what it is they do incorporate.
So if we think that iPads are moving, or tablet computing is moving more in the direction where it replaces your computer, and you think about the life cycle, just the normal life cycle of a computer,
Yeah.
and let's just say, the life cycle of a computer for normal people is maybe 4 or 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the actual number is, but I think 4 or 5 years is probably fair for a traditional computer.
Yeah.
For most people. I'm not talking about the super nerds that buy the latest, greatest all the time. So if you apply that to iPads, and the previous iPads kind of had the same issue to where they were good enough for so long that the upgrade cycle on those was nowhere near what an iPhone is, or what we'd kind of grown used to just in the smartphone market in general, whether it's an iPhone or an Android phone. So are we back there now with the iPad Pro? Because the iPad Pro is what kind of broke us out of that.
Yes.
Where, oh my goodness, this is such a leap forward with the smart connector, the Apple Pencil, the specs kind of under the hood of your iPad Pro.
Mm-hmm.
But now that we've had a couple of generations of that, is the life cycle. I'm curious to know, and we will never know this, but what Apple thinks the life cycle of an iPad Pro is.
Yeah.
So if I bought the original iPad Pro, whether it's was the smaller one or the larger one, doesn't really matter. If I bought one of those original ones, I wonder what the average expected life cycle that is. Is it 3 years? Is it 4 years? Because if so, then you think the subsequent models of iPad Pro or iPads Pro, whatever the proper plural of that is,
Right.
then the subsequent models of those then would be, capturing a part of the market that's not already bought one of those. Not for the ones that originally did, because the people that originally did maybe still have a year or two before they decide, yeah, I need a new one now.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. So here's the thing. I think a couple of places where the iPad Pro is going to have to improve, and so you can buy the iPad Pro now, but what you have to buy is you have to buy accessories. And so for most people, they end up buying a smart keyboard or some kind of third-party keyboard. You certainly need an Apple Pencil, and maybe that doesn't go away. But I wouldn't be surprised. So say this, and it's been talked about in the past, although I don't know if anybody's speculating about it anymore. But if they're able to do face recognition in the cameras, in the depth, the true depth cameras with the iPhone 10s, then it may not be long until we move into a real virtual keyboard. So you can use a keyboard that shows up on your screen, or you can prop your iPad Pro up, and the camera, you just type on the table in front of you with some kind of, watermarked keyboard that shows up on your screen, and there it's able to, the camera's able to follow your fingering. It's able to know what it is that you're typing. And so you've got a true virtual keyboard. You can eliminate the keyboard in the iPad Pros. That that could be a possibility in the future, where you're not having to accessorize with all of these add-ons, and you truly are now you just have a tablet.
So, okay, so the kind of projected keyboard is already a thing.
Yeah.
And I don't know how well they actually work.
But it's not good. No, it's not
No,
good.
no, it's not. And that would be one of those kind of classic Apple things where they take the line that, a lot of companies have tried this before, none of them have done it well. We actually did it right, and aren't we great? That's a very Apple-y thing to do. And they could do something like that. Would you use that? We just talked about how you don't like the short travel of a MacBook Pro keyboard. What happens when you have no travel? Because one of the things that is the least appealing to me is actually typing on a hard surface iPad. I do it when I need to do it, but it's not pleasant.
Right.
So anyway, I'll tell you this. I am very interested to see what they do with the iPad Pro, because, as any of our listeners know, this to me is the computer I use more than any other computer.
Yeah.
Is my 12.9-inch iPad Pro. I actually still have the original 12.9-inch iPad Pro. I didn't buy the second generation because the first one still works great. It's not slow.
Right.
I don't have battery problems. There is not a thing about it that has given me any reason to want to replace it. Now, the second generation had some better specs and a better screen and, those sorts of things, but it wasn't enough for me to go spend money to buy one. It just wasn't, right?
Right.
So to me, my iPad is kind of taking over kind of the same life cycle that a desktop or a laptop computer has. So I'm excited to see what they do with it, because the iPad Pro is my favorite kind of computing device. But it's going to have to be something big if they expect a big, a new or a big push in sales on that one. So we'll see what happens. All right, so we're running short on time, so let's turbo through the next few, shall we?
Okay, yeah, let's do.
All right, iPhone SE 2. Does that interest you at all?
Couldn't care less.
Really? Okay, so I'm actually interested about this one.
Yeah.
Or in this one. So here's why. If you remember, the iPhone SE is the same size as the iPhone 5 or 5S.
That's right.
The current version of that. And the reason that was important is Apple moved away from the smaller phone design up to the iPhone 6 at the time. And then there were a lot of people who felt left behind because they didn't want the larger screen, whether it was the 6 or the 6 Plus, which was the first really big iPhone.
Right.
So they released this iPhone SE, which had the internal specs, I think, of an iPhone 6 when they eventually released it. And so it's been a while. So it says the iPhone SE debuted in March of 2016. So it's a couple of years old at this point.
Yeah.
So the rumor is that if it looks kind of like an iPhone 10 or 10-ish, well, who knows what that actually looks like. But let's say it has the internal specs of like an iPhone 8. I think that's a big deal for people, especially for people that want a really good smartphone or want an iOS device without spending $1,000. I think the importance of the SE in the line is not one of a technical matter, but more of an affordability matter.
That's probably right. And I do
important.
think it'll be a little smaller, and I think there are people that do like having a smaller phone. I mean, you really, when you went to the 6 and then the 7 and then the 8 and, not even talking about the Plus, you did go into a bigger phone. And, there is something, I think there is something handy about a smaller phone in some ways.
Yeah. So I agree with the size. That is certainly the right fit for a lot of people. But even more than that, I think Apple does a really good job of talking about inclusivity and accessibility with their devices. And I believe that they believe that. That's important for their devices to be accessible to anyone, regardless of their ability. So they talk a lot about customers of theirs that have different types of impairments, and they want to make sure that they are thoughtful of that when they're designing the hardware and software. I think that's admirable. I think every company should do that.
Right.
The problem with that, though, is what they don't ever address is accessibility in the terms of financial accessibility.
Yeah.
They're at the high end of the highest end of the market in everything that they do. And so when you think about, Apple's commitment to, say, security, privacy, accessibility features, is that something that only wealthy people deserve?
Mm-hmm.
And so having a device like the iPhone SE or the MacBook Air, which is the lowest price Mac, or laptop anyway, you have the Mac Mini that they basically forgot about. But my big concern with Apple is typically around kind of financial accessibility for customers, not just kind of hardware or software accessibility.
Yeah.
And I think that's why the iPhone SE is important, because it keeps a model out there that is usually significantly lower price than the other models. And I think that's very important for them.
I think so. It'll be interesting to see what does come out. I think you're right. And I think this rumor is right. I do think you'll see a refresh of the iPhone SE, and it probably will. It will be something that's more, from a hardware standpoint, compatible with the 8 or the 10, and I think the design it'll appeal to a good portion of the market as well as the price, and updated to run the latest, iOS. So I think so. The next one on there, I can already tell you without you even mentioning it, they lost me. I don't care what they have to say about it.
Apple AirPower. They announced this last year. They announced this in September of 2017. It's basically their wireless charging pad that will charge 3 devices at once. And the picture they always show is an iPhone, an Apple Watch, and then your AirPods in a new little case that allows you to wirelessly charge your AirPods.
Yeah, so you have to upgrade your case. And I don't know about you, but they dropped the phones that are able to be that you can air power, and they did not produce a charging pad. So I think everybody's bought a third-party charging pad.
Yep.
I think it's white noise.
Yep. Agreed.
All right, so move into the software updates, which is really what WWDC is about if you're a purist. So iOS 12, what's the speculation about that?
Nobody knows. I think at this point, iOS 11 has been so buggy that I think the conventional wisdom here is please just make the next version stable without adding a bunch of features that's likely just to break it again.
Well, and it's a double-edged sword because iOS 11 was a big step forward and did open up your iPad, particularly your iPad, to a whole new world of productivity with the dock on the bottom, with easy access to, you can multitask. You can even have, in some ways, 3 programs open at once. So there are some things that are really great about iOS 11, and yet when you're using it every day all the time, you run into some of these things that drive you crazy.
Yeah, so the features that you just mentioned were specific to the iPad, and I think iOS 11 was a major upgrade for iPad users. And on the iPhone, maybe not a whole lot. However, keep in mind, iOS 11 is when they introduced augmented reality to iPad and iPhones.
Right.
And so that's a big deal. And that was actually my blank check last week, was the IKEA app that allowed you to place furniture in augmented reality around your house so that you can see how it looks before you decided to buy it. So the AR aspect to the iPhone was a very big deal. But iOS 11 for me was a bigger deal on the iPad. That being said, it has been incredibly buggy. And all of the point releases, so 11 point this, 11 point that, have fixed some problems and created others. It's been an incredibly buggy release.
And it was a whole battery problem that got introduced in iPhone, the iOS 11. And I will say this about augmented reality. I think augmented reality is awesome in theory, and I think a few companies or a few apps have utilized it. But by and large, it is technology that really is cool that nobody seems to be doing anything practical with. Save your IKEA, app. But yet, I think so. So I wonder, man, is iOS 11 and their augmented reality, is it not ready for, practical AR use? And does iOS 12 bring us, into a place where that's easier for developers, it's easier for apps, it's something that's more a part of our daily routine? I don't know. I'm anxious to see some very practical, useful AR applications.
Yeah, and I am too. And I think we will see those. I think those may be longer. We may have to wait a little bit longer to see some that are that kind of break into the mainstream. But you know what? We've already actually seen one, and people just don't realize it. It was Pokemon Go. Pokemon Go was one of the most popular, if not the most popular apps in the world.
Yeah, that's true.
And it uses augmented reality.
That's true. And I didn't get in. I mean, I knew it was around. I never did it, and so it wasn't something that I participated in. But you are right. They were the first to jump on that and capture it, and it was a craze. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, so let's move on to the final one here, and that is Marzipan.
Yes, and we're not talking about the hard outer icing of molded dessert characters. Did I say that right?
I have no idea if you said that right or not. I'm guessing that came from wherever your knowledge of land masses came from.
Yeah, it did. My assistant looked up marzipan for me, but that actually has nothing to do with, or I don't know what it has to do with. Let me say that.
Oh, I think it does. Yeah, but this is an unconfirmed code name for a maybe not project that Apple's working on to combine in some sort iOS and Mac OS. And who knows what in practicality that actually looks like? Who knows? But we think that this is the code name used for an initiative that is allowing Apple to use kind of a single set of apps that work across all devices. So whether it's an iPhone, an iPad, or a Mac. So this is kind of what we've talked about for a while as the possible end game of Apple. And this is, not unique to them specifically, but basically getting to a point where iPhone, iPad, and Macs are all kind of the same thing in the way that you can run apps the same way across all devices. So it's not necessarily, from what I understand, a unified operating system to where you're running iOS on a MacBook, but it seems more like a way for you to use iOS apps on your Mac in a way, the same way that you can use Android apps on a Chromebook, which is a game changer. It really is. My daughter has a Chromebook. We've talked about this before, and I use it from time to time as well. But the fact that I can just install the Netflix app on her Chromebook, it's pretty cool. The fact that you can install games or, just different Android apps onto a Chromebook, that's actually really handy. I like that idea a lot. And so we don't know if this is true or not. Even the code name of Marzipan, which I didn't know what that was, I kind of thought I did, and then you confirmed it. Even that code name has not been confirmed. So we don't know how real this is or if it's not. But I think the conventional wisdom says that, of course, Apple is working on a way to better kind of bring these two worlds together, because Apple's revenue comes from iOS, period. Right? Their moneymaker is iOS, no doubt. And even the services revenue that's been a big deal for them comes from Apple Music, which is iOS, and comes from iCloud storage, which is iOS. Those sorts of things. That's where all their money is. They make such a small portion of their actual money from Mac OS. So the reason that maybe those devices don't get the attention that you think they need is, just follow the money. If you don't know what the answer is, it's probably money.
Yeah.
And in this case, that's exactly true. So, most of their money comes from iOS devices, and specifically the iPhone, and then the services around the iPhone.
Well, so let me ask you this as you close it up. What's your desire? So you use your iPad Pro. It is something that in a lot of ways has replaced your, sort of daily computer, your travel computer, those sorts of things. What do you want to see? Are you a guy that advocates for you want a full OS on your iPad? Do you want parity between that and your laptop? What is it that what would serve you, do you think?
Well, that's a really good question. I would say that I would want my iPad Pro to be more Mac-like. Meaning, so we record our show every week, and technically you can record a podcast on an iPad. I never use my iPad to record a podcast because it's too clunky. It's just not very user-friendly. So I would like to use my iPad Pro for the same things that I use my MacBook for, my MacBook Pro for. Actually, my MacBook Air. I didn't even buy the new MacBook Pro. I bought a MacBook Air because I was so terrified of the MacBook Pro keyboard.
Yeah.
So I would like to use my iPad more like a computer. I would like for it to have the same capability as my computer. And on the other hand, I would like for my MacBook Air to have the apps that I have on my iPad. So I kind of sound like I'm a Marzipan project supporter, if there is such a thing.
Well, I'll tell you what I noticed this week, which was an app that I use often on my iPad and sometimes on my iPhone, and that is Apple's new TV app. Okay, so I really like that. I use it on my iPad. It aggregates, shows and viewing options from all the different apps. It becomes a clearinghouse. You can click on that. It takes you right to the app. And it also, gives you access to Apple's content and those sorts of things. There is not that app. They don't have that built into their OS. There is not anything that's like that. So if you're going to watch something on Netflix, you've got to go to Netflix on your computer. If you're going to watch it on Amazon Prime, you go there. So it's in your Apple TV. It's built into your iPad, into your iPhone. It is not available in any way on your, in Mac OS, on your laptop or on your desktop. And I was surprised by that.
That's a good example. That's a perfect example of, that would be a nice app to have on your Mac. So it sounds like we kind of agree here that we could use some more integration between those two platforms. And I think Apple's probably working their way towards that. And we'll see. That we don't even know, again, if Project Marzipan is a real thing. I would have to think that concept is, whether it's called Marzipan or not. So no need to Marzapanic. Sorry, I had to say it.
Yes.
And, we'll see what happens. But I would like to see these two things integrated more than they are now.
Well, WWDC is 2 weeks away from the time of this recording. And so what we'll see in the next 14 days is that I think speculation will become more focused. I do think, there's always some things that leak. And so over the next 14 days, you'll see more rumors. You'll see things that probably have more to substantiate it. And it'll be interesting to see what actually happens come June the 4th. Hey, Keith, man, this has been a great show. We've talked about a lot, but I sure wouldn't want to end this show without knowing what your blank check is this week.
All right, so my blank check this week is the Wirecutter, and that is the wirecutter.com for those of you that don't know. Ross, are you familiar with this website?
No, actually, I'm not. And for those that are listening, this is actually our second take of the blank check because I thought I knew what the Wirecutter was, and I had no idea. So we re-recorded this. So no, Keith, I have no idea what Wirecutter is.
Okay, so the Wirecutter, it's such a good site. This is basically what you wish Consumer Reports was. So the Wirecutter has been an independent review site forever, and it was recently acquired actually by the New York Times. So it's now a New York Times property.
Oh, okay.
But it doesn't look like the New York Times is doing anything to mess it up. So that's good. Good on them for not messing it up. So what they do is they review and put out product guides for just countless categories of products or devices. So if I look across the top of their website, they've got categories for electronics, kitchen and dining, health and fitness, baby and kid, outdoors, office, and they've got a whole section of travel, home and garden, appliances, pets, all these other sorts of things. So the good thing about the Wirecutter is they have very good reviews, and they do a very good job of explaining how they came to their conclusions. So for example, I'm going to click on a review here of the best Android phones.
Okay.
So I'm going to click on that. And this isn't just techie stuff. Like I said, you can do kitchen and dining stuff. If you have kids and you need some baby and kid products, then they review those as well. And so if I'm looking at this one for the best Android phones, I'm doing this because we're a tech show. So they go through and they always have a pick. So they say our pick is this. And then they have a link to where you can go buy it. They give you a quick overview of that particular product. And then they always have a runner-up. So their runner-up product, and they explain why it's their runner-up. So kind of their second place. If you don't like their first pick, they've got a runner-up.
Okay.
And then they always also have an explanation as far as how they did what they did. So there's a section that says why you should trust us. And they give, in this case, an example, or they give you an explanation for why you should trust them on reviewing Android phones. And then they give you a detailed explanation of how we picked and how they tested the devices. So you know exactly what they used in order to determine the best and those sorts of things. And then they have a section on here. This is Android phone, so it says, should you upgrade? And so they talk about if you have a current Android phone, here's why you should upgrade to this new one, or why you shouldn't upgrade to this one. They do such a good job of explaining their methodology, the different options, and exactly why they picked the ones that they picked, and even give you a backup. And I think it's an in-depth review of devices that's really transparent in the logic that they use, and you will learn a lot about these different products. So they also a lot of times will give you a budget pick. So if you can't afford their top pick, they'll give you a really good recommendation for something that's less expensive that they also recommend. So it's a really good review site. It's completely free. So if you don't have a subscription to Consumer Reports, you don't really need one. You can go to the Wirecutter. It's thewirecutter.com, and you can search for almost anything, and you will find every category you can imagine represented with excellent reviews, and you know exactly how they chose the ones that they chose. Lots of good options, and they have links directly to where to buy those things if you want to. You know me, Ross, I'm not all about just buying stuff just for the sake of buying stuff. Mm-hmm. So if you want to make a really good informed buying decision on something, this is a great place to start, thewirecutter.com.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. It looks great. The refrigerator, the carry-on luggage, the best yoga mat. So there are all kinds of things. You're right, Keith. It's not just techie things. It's stuff people are buying every day. So, yeah, that's a great pick, wirecutter.com. All right, well, I'll give you what mine is this week. It's the big green egg, and I'll tell you because it's springtime's coming to an end. Summer is upon us, and one of the things I get is much question about, almost as much as I do about technology or computers or things like that, is my big green egg. It is my outdoor grill and smoker. And so a few years ago, I always had, I had a grill that, we'd cook, steaks or burgers or things like that on. And then I had one of those old traditional smokers, wood burning smokers where you build the fire in a fire pit on the side of it, and then you can, slow smoke a brisket or chicken or pork or things like that. And I really like doing this. One of my outdoor hobbies. Is one of the things I love to do in the summer. A couple of years ago, I bought the big green egg. It is a ceramic smoker that uses lump charcoal, and it is absolutely amazing. It is so for you, if you're out there and you're a guy who likes to smoke a brisket or smoke ribs or slow cook something out on over an open flame, open heat, this is the thing to do. You can set it up. It'll burn as hot as 700, 800 degrees if you want to do some fancy steak cooking. Or Keith, you can set it. I can put it on there. It can sit at the temperature 220. I can put a brisket on and smoke it for 16 hours and not have to touch it. I mean, this thing is one of the most amazing cooking devices I have ever had in my life. And so I've had mine for about 5 years now, have not worn it out, have used it countless times, and it still works just like the day I bought it.
I wish I had the patience to slow cook. One of these days, maybe I'll be able to do that.
It's a great hobby for me, very therapeutic. I love to cook. For lots of people. And so it's, the big green egg, it's one of the best investments. I replaced a smoker and a grill, so I don't have two things in my backyard anymore. I just have one, and it does everything I need to.
Nice. Good pick.
All right. Well, hey, this has been a great show, Keith. I'm glad to get to do this with you, and I look forward to it next week. Thanks for listening to Fill in the Blank, where we discuss how the technology of today impacts the world of tomorrow. We'll be back next week with another episode, and in the meantime, you can find us on Twitter at AskFITB or email us at fitbpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear what you think of the show, and if you like the show, tell your friends. And please rate us and review us on iTunes or from wherever it is that you're listening to the podcast. And remember the Fill in the Blank $1 challenge. Your support goes a long way. We'll see you again next week here at Fill in the Blank.